very nice story when I went in to say goodbye to her. And I took a little piece of silver I'd had made up for her, and she gave me a signed photograph. I should think the signed photograph is probably worth more than the silver. Anyway, I said, can I have fourpence worth on a matter of policy I've been working on before I go? And she said, looking rather resigned, she said, yes, dear, politely. So we sat down, and I outlined a matter which I won't bore you with the details of, but it was something which she instantly stiffened and said, oh, don't be so silly, dear, that's a socialist shirkers charter. You know, we can't have any of that. And then she paused, because what she had done was to give the initial reaction and then wait to see whether you could defend your position and whether you would, whether you dared. So I did, of course, being me. And she was instantly fascinated. And she said, you know, I think I'd rather like to hear more about this, dear. So she went and slammed the door of the office on the face of the Japanese ambassador who was due in next, and went to the bookshelf, and behind it there was a bottle of bad whiskey with two very nice cut glasses. So we had some bad whiskey while I explained this, and she then argued and argued and argued against it and tried to find holes in it. She loved that kind of discussion. Couldn't find any holes in the end. So she said, oh, which government departments are working on it? So I told her. And she was quite fascinated. And in fact, ever since then, the Conservative Party has changed its direction on the particular question. Conservatism is an aspect of the way the welfare system works. And they're gradually introducing something very like the mechanism that I had proposed to her then. But the fascinating thing was that she was so willing to change her view, provided you could argue for it. She had no time for you if you couldn't argue for your point of view. But if you stood your ground and said, oh, come off it, Prime Minister, you have to be polite, but you know that the facts are these. And the facts were as you said they were. She would change her view, and this is what made her so intellectually powerful. She was genuinely curious about these matters. Now, on the climate, I had merely indicated that the scientists were beginning to become concerned. This was 1982 to 86, when it really hadn't quite surfaced as a major issue, but I was spotting it in the journals. So, I flagged it up to her and said, we may need to keep an eye on this, but we didn't go any further than that. But then my successor, who was not any kind of scientist, got very overexcited by global warming and got her to make a quite remarkably stupid speech in 1998, 2 years after I'd stopped working for her, in which she said that the world was going to warm by 1 Celsius degree every 10 years unless we stop the CO2 emissions. Well, of course, that was a huge exaggeration. It's going to be more like 1 Celsius degree every 100 years. It was a tenfold exaggeration. And she subsequently realized that she'd been had, and that this had all gone too far and got out of hand. And in her memoirs, she says, well, of course, this was another way in which the left was trying to push back against the very idea of democracy by saying you have to have a world governing body of some kind to control and police the amount of stuff emitted to the atmosphere. And she said, this is a totalitarian's wet dream and we should have nothing to do with it. So she came round in the end on the global warming thing and saw very clearly where the truth was. But of course the present Conservative Party under the fatuous David Cameron, and then you've got your Lindsey Grahams in the Republican Party too, who take the left-wing side because there are some local constituency advantages to it, not because it's true. And on the whole, the centre-right are broadly sceptical of this, as they are of everything, which is the correct stance on any scientific question. But the left, of course, are driving forward with this. They are determined to get the sort of socialist, international, totalitarian, call it communist, call it fascist, call it national socialist, but on an international scale, government that they have long had in mind and long been advocating. And they're going to get it.